Good evening, I'm David Brown, and this is the Northern Sun Experience. We have expert basketball analysis from Jordan Dalton coming up as he previews the final weekend of the regular season. Plus, a look at some track and field record holders a little bit later in my top plays. But we begin tonight's show with the Big Three in NSIC wrestling. Augustana, St. Cloud State, and Upper Iowa were all undefeated in conference duels heading into this past week. But that would all change on Thursday as the Peacocks visited the Vikings in Sioux Falls. Upper Iowa would get the upper hand right away at 184 pounds. Blake Sorensen gets 2 points on the takedown of Arrow Amo, and he would eventually get a 6-5 decision. Back come the Vikings. Jade Dokken takes down Richard Briggs at 197 pounds. He gets the only pin of the match, and Augie retakes the lead on Upper Iowa. And the Vikings would win the next 6 matches after that. Sean Hattelstad with a sudden takedown victory over Jordan Rinkin at 157 pounds. Hattelstad would be named the Conference Wrestler of the Week, and the Vikings hand the Peacocks their first NSIC loss, 25-9. The Peacocks would try to bounce back on Saturday. No easy task against number 1 St. Cloud State, and the Huskies would take control early. Mike Rohn with the near-fall points against the Peacocks' Mike Paulus at 133 pounds. Rohn would eventually win by major decision. At 149 pounds, a scrum breaks out between Larry Bomstad and Trevor Duke, but Bomstad gets the near-fall points and a major decision. Then in the final seconds of the 174-pound matchup, it's the Huskies' Clayton Jennison getting the winning takedown over Dalton Westerlund. Huskies up 23-0 at that point, and St. Cloud State goes on to win 26-6 as Upper Iowa falls to its 2 biggest conference rivals. When we come back, we'll break down the second-to-last weekend of the regular season in NSIC hoops.
The Northern Sun Experience on Midco Sports Network is presented by CU Mortgage Direct LLC, Sanford Health, and Dakota Land Honda.
And welcome back to the Northern Sun Experience, run once again by former Augustana point guard Jordan Dalton. And Jordan, a very interesting weekend on the women's side of things, especially with Northern State. They continue to struggle, lost another close game on Friday to St. Cloud State. It was their 3rd straight loss by a combined 5 points. Then they score 19 in the first half against UMD, get 60 in the second half to win. So did that 60-point second half sort of flip the script for the Wolves, or are there some things they still need to fix?
Well, you would hope they build off that momentum of that second half, but they have to stop turning the basketball over. We've talked all year long how they play at a pretty slow and methodical pace. So what that does is it limits the number of possessions you're going to have in a game. And over the last 4 games, they've been averaging 14 turnovers. And so in a limited possession game, you're really shooting yourself in the foot by turning the basketball over that many times. Good teams just don't beat themselves, and right now they haven't been doing a good enough job of really executing on the offensive end. And they still have trouble scoring and getting easy buckets and easy points. They only had 3 players on their team that have shot more than 50 free throws this entire season. And so you have to have more aggressive style of play and getting to the free throw line because those are easy points. We talked about how they run a lot of sets, they score a lot out of their sets, but at the same time they have to find another way to generate some offense.
Do they need to play more up tempo, or do they just need to have different sets that maybe lead to easier shots rather than settling for jumpers?
Well, I think playing up tempo, that's just not their style. That's not who they are. That's not who they're built to be. But getting to the free throw line is something you can do whether you're in the half-court setting or you're playing a little bit more up-tempo. I just think they have to be more offensive-minded and aggressive. Every time they have the basketball, they have to look at themselves as a scoring threat.
Well, Northern State continues to try and correct some things. They'll try and do that again in this final regular season weekend. A team they were competing with most of the season in Wayne State, they won both their games this weekend, now on a 14-game winning streak, appear to be in the driver's seat for that number 1 seed. But the next longest winning streak is actually Minnesota State Moorhead, 3 in a row, 7 of 9. What's working for the Dragons?
Well, one thing that's been working is getting the ball to junior guard Megan Rorick. She's been
easy for you to say.
No kidding, right? She's been great from the outside. She had a great Saturday night, scoring 31 points, going 6 for 8 from three-point line. And she's been that way all year. You know, she's averaging 18.5 points a game, which is good for second in the conference. And she's an offensive weapon that makes the game a lot easier for everybody else on the team. Teams know when others are penetrating in her gap, they can't help off of her because she's such an offensive threat. So that creates a lot of one-on-one situations when you're talking about penetration. And so she makes the game a lot easier, not only for herself, but for her entire team. And the Dragons have been doing a great job of taking advantage of that aggressive style of play. They're averaging over 20 free throws a game. And so we just talked about ways to generate easy offense, and they've seemed to be doing a good job of that the entire year.
Well, as I said, they've won 3 in a row. They started that winning streak against Augustana. They got 2 double-digit wins this weekend, including a revenge win against rival USF. They've won 7 of 8 with that one loss to MSU Moorhead in there. So where do you see the Vikings in this crowded middle-of-the-pack NSIC?
Well, you talk about crowded. With the exception of Wayne State, there's 7 teams within 4 games of each other. And so I think Augustana they're coming up on playing their best team basketball of the year. They get 2 wins this weekend without their leader, Shantiva Ashley, having a great weekend, only averaging 8 points per game. And so we talked about teams continuing to improve, wanting to be playing their best basketball when tournament time comes. And I think Augustana has done a great job of putting themselves in that spot. Past 6 games, sophomore guard Sydney Rome has been playing great. She's shooting over 47% from the three-point line and also averaging over 11 points. And we talked about it before. The supporting cast has to step up and help Ashley out, and they've been doing that this weekend.
We mentioned Wayne State at the top and sort of that clump in the middle, but one of the preseason favorites was Concordia St. Paul. They lost both their games this weekend. Annika Whiting did her part, though, scored 54 points total. She had 20 alone in the second half against Upper Iowa on Friday. But as I mentioned, they were the preseason favorite. They had the most first-place votes coming in, and they've struggled. Why have they struggled so much this year?
One of the biggest reasons is on the road. They're 3-6 right now in conference and on the road. And we talked about it before. If you're going to be an upper echelon, a top-tier team in this conference, you have to be able to go out on the road and get wins consistently. And right now, they just haven't been able to do that for one reason or another. You look at their losses, too. Only 3 of their losses have been by double digits. So they've been in every single game that they've played in. They just have had an inability to close games out. And what that tells you is they're not together come crunch time. So whether it's defensive rotations, getting stops, getting clean rebounds in crunch time, or executing on the offensive end, something just isn't clicking in the crunch time and in those close games, and they haven't been able to come up with those wins.
Well, we'll see if they can improve their road record. They're on the road for this final regular season weekend. And speaking of that, what is the matchup you're looking forward to on this final weekend before the NSIC tournament?
Really looking forward to Wayne State and Winona. I know Wayne State did a great job playing against them 3 weeks ago, ended up winning the game by 20 points. But we talked about it. Winona's a very different team when they're playing at home. And so I think that'll be a very intriguing matchup. I expect it to be a pretty high-scoring game. We'll see if Winona State is able to stop Wayne on their streak.
All right, Jordan, thank you very much. Well, when we come back, we'll switch over to the men's side. 18 wins in a row now for this guy's alma mater. We'll see why they continue to stay hot next.
The Northern Sun Experience on Midco Sports Network is presented by CU Mortgage Direct LLC, Sanford Health, and Dakota Land Honda.
And welcome back to the Northern Sun Experience, once again joined by Jordan Dalton. And Jordan, your alma mater just continues to roll. 18 wins in a row now for Augustana, 25 on the season, a new school record. So what do they need to do in this final regular season weekend to keep that momentum going?
I think the biggest thing they need to do is just block out all the white noise. They've had
like us.
Great, no kidding, right? They've had a great year so far. Like you said, a school record 25 wins. But they've gotten to that place by simply taking it one game at a time. When they're old and gray, they'll be able to reflect back on this year and talk about how great of a season it has been. But right now, they still have more challenges ahead of them and more goals they want to accomplish this year. When they started out the season, I'm sure the number one goal was, hey, we want to win the conference. And they put themselves obviously in a great position to do that. Second goal, we want to win the conference tournament. And so they've got to this point by sticking together as a group, still one of the most unselfish teams in the entire conference with 4 guys averaging double figures and over 17 assists per game. And so they've done this by just taking it one game at a time. And so right now it'll be very important for them, like I said, block out all the white noise. You let the alumni, you let the fans, you let the media talk about what a record-breaking season you're having, and all you're worried about is that next game. And that comes from leadership. Coach Tom Billiter will do a great job of making sure they're focused and not overlooking any opponents. And once again, you start 3 juniors who have been in these situations before, and they're not satisfied. You hear some of the talks by Casey Schilling. They're not satisfied with 25 wins. We talked about they have high expectations for themselves, and Casey and Dan and those guys, they're not going to let their team lose focus.
Absolutely. They're still ranked number 2 in the nation. Meanwhile, Minnesota State, Moorhead back on track. Of course, they lost to Augustana last weekend. They got a couple of double-digit home wins this weekend. So how were they able to regroup after that tough loss to Augie?
That was great to see by the Dragons bounce back and have a great weekend. I think they just stayed true to who they are. All this season, they've been a great offensive juggernaut. They can shoot the basketball really well, and this weekend was no exception. Both games they made 10 three-pointers or more and shot better than 50% from the field in both games. And so that just speaks to the leadership that they have, starting all the way from the coaching staff down to their senior point guard, Jordan Reaver. The guys were able to stay together. They didn't fraction. Nobody was trying to win the game by themselves. They believed in their system, and not to hurt when your senior point guard Jordan Reaver gets Player of the Week again, averaging 19 points and 5.5 assists and 6 rebounds per game this weekend. And so it was a great character win for that team, for the Dragons. They were able to stay together and come out and perform great this weekend.
Dragons still pretty much neck and neck with the Vikings, but a game behind because of that loss. Well, switching to another team that's kind of been a bit of a mystery lately, Minnesota State. 2 close games this weekend. The big shocker, though, they lost at home Friday night to Winona State, a below 500 team in the conference. Then the Mavericks need overtime on Saturday for a 1-point win against Upper Iowa. So do these games get the Mavs battle-tested for the conference tournament, or are they cause for concern?
We spoke earlier in the women's segment about how you want to be playing your best basketball come March. And right now I just don't think they've found that right chemistry to play their best basketball. We talk about their 2 big guns in Asa Mariah and Zach Monahan. Well, Friday night, Zach Monahan struggled. He went 2 for 11 from the field and only had 7 points, and they ended up losing that game. And that's kind of been their MO all year. They have to have Monahan and Mariah come up huge in order for them to get wins. And so while, like I said, every team has things to work on, it's getting down to the crunch time where they're going to have to straighten out and correct some of those mistakes that they haven't been able to overcome so far. One bright spot this weekend was Connor Miller did have 17 points against Winona, and Mike Busak did have 15 and 13 against Upper Iowa. So you have some supporting cast members that did have great games this weekend and have proven that they can step up. It just has to be more consistent. And I think that's the one word when you think of the Minnesota State Mankato Mavericks team, it's consistency. Are they able to come out each and every night, play at a high level, and have more than 2 guys show up each time?
You mentioned how well Miller played. They actually needed a Miller 3 with 2/10 left just to force overtime against Upper Iowa. So the Mavericks, as you said, may not be playing their best basketball right now. And a team that we know is not playing its best right now is Northern State. They've lost 4 of their past 5, including 3 at home, and only one of those wins came against Wayne State, who's last in the conference. So how do the Wolves turn it around?
I almost sound like a broken record here, but turnovers, and 3 of those 4 losses, they turned the basketball over double digits. And so you just can't give other teams that type of opportunity, especially on the men's side. This conference is too deep to turn the basketball over 10-plus times. You have to at least get a shot attempt every time down the court. And so they have to just be more focused on the offensive end. And they also, in 3 of those 4 losses, gave up 10 or more three-pointers in each of those losses. And so it's one of those things where you have to know the scouting report. You have to know if a guy's a shooter, you got to run him off the three-point line, make him put the ball on the ground. And that's just a lack of focus and a lack of being engaged in the game. And so I think if they can clean those things up, they've showed they're a tough physical team. And so not a lot of teams want to play against them because they know it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out battle. But they have to be more focused and more crisp on the offensive end and more tuned in on the defensive end if they're going to look to make a deep conference run.
Yeah, it's not like they aren't playing terribly. They have had some close games. They were close against Augustana, beat Minnesota State a couple of weeks ago on a last-second 3, so maybe they just need to work on closing things out.
Absolutely. Well, like you said, they have the talent to do that. They got 4 guys that can go out there, give you 15 to 20 every night, and they play such a tough physical style of basketball that's draining for 40 minutes. But what they can't do is give the other team ammunition by turning the basketball over. They have to force guys into their weaknesses. So if a guy's a three-point shooter, you got to run out at him, make him put the basketball on the floor. And like I said, that's just being tuned in. I'm sure the coaching staff does a great job of putting those scouting reports together. Teams just have to follow them. Coaches always say they can come up with the greatest game plan in the world, but it's on the players to go out there and execute every single night.
Well, Augie and Minnesota State Moorhead, the top two teams in the conference, both on the road this final weekend. Are they part of your matchups to look forward to, or is something else catching your eye?
They are. I picked Augustana versus Upper Iowa. They had a game earlier this season that was an absolute shootout. 92-81. Augie was able to come out with the victory. But Upper Iowa was able to speed the pace of that game over, turn them over a few times. And I think that has to be somewhat of the recipe if you're going to win against Augustana. You can't let them get into the half-court setting because they have two absolute monsters down low, and Dan Jansen and Casey Schilling. And so if you're able to put a little full-court pressure on them, maybe turn the basketball over, and hopefully they miss a couple of three-pointers, I think Upper Iowa has a shot.
Well, when we're here next week, we're going to be talking tournament time. Looking forward to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Christmas in March.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jordan Dalton. Well, when we come back, it's a supersized edition of DB's Picks, my top 10 of the past week.
The Northern Sun Experience on Midco Sports Network is presented by CU Mortgage Direct LLC, Sanford Health, and Dakota Land Honda.
And welcome back to the Northern Sun Experience. Thanks to some great hoops, some broken records, and just some all-around excellence, this week's episode will feature a supersized top 10 countdown of DB's picks for the past week. At number 10, we head to Mankato, where Maverick Zach Monahan is flying high. The senior gets the steal and the slam for Minnesota State against Upper Iowa. The Mavs' top gun will need to play well down the stretch, while his team looks to soar in the final weekend of the regular season. But for at least one play, Monahan's rising up to the challenge at number 10. For number 9, Minnesota State Moorhead's women say, why not? Natalie Van Wy with the touchdown pass to Morgan Banasic for the hoop plus the foul. Here it is again, great job by Banasic for breaking the press, and an even better pass by Van Wy to find the open sophomore. Minnesota State Moorhead has won 7 of its past 9 games, and hot fire like that will keep the Dragons flying throughout the conference. At number 8, the Golden Bears thread a golden needle. Concordia St. Paul's Keith Crockett with the beautiful pass to a backdoor cutting Nooney Omat for the slam. Check it out in slow motion, you could not script it any better. The Golden Bears secured a first-round home playoff game next Wednesday with a win over Winona State. It's a fresh start to the second season, thanks to crisp plays like this at number 8. And the slams keep on coming at number 7. Luke Scott with the alley, Jermaine DeCoste with the oop for U Mary against Minnesota Crookston. The Golden Eagles fall asleep on defense as DeCoste sneaks in behind the 2-3 zone. The Marauders were in the zone, sweeping this past weekend, as DeCoste sweeps through the sky for the number 7 play of the week. And for number 6, a different kind of slam, only this time on the mat. Augustana's Jade Dockin takes Upper Iowa's Richard Briggs to the floor, and he eventually gets the pin at 197 pounds. In a huge duel between undefeated conference rivals, it would be the Vikings getting the upper hand on the Upper Iowa Peacocks. Dockin's pin was the only one of the match, and it's the only one that finishes part 1 of my top 10 plays of the past week. Well, we've reached halftime of my top 10. The second half is coming up next, only on the Northern Sun Experience.
The Northern Sun Experience on Midco Sports Network is presented by CU Mortgage Direct LLC, Sanford Health, and Dakota Land Honda.
And welcome back to the Northern Sun Experience. 5 down and 5 to go. Here's the rest of my top plays from the past week. It's only fitting that jersey number 5 is at play number 5. Minnesota State Moorhead's Prescott Williams drives the baseline for the left-handed slam plus the foul. Take a look at it from a couple of different angles. The Dragons bounced back from a big loss to Augustana last week with 2 resounding home victories and one very big slam from Williams, who unleashes his fury at number 5. And for number 4, it's a 3, but not just any 3. With time winding down in regulation, Minnesota State keeps Connor Miller's first miss alive, and he would not miss the second. He drains the tying three-pointer with just 0.2 of a second left to force overtime against Upper Iowa. The Mavericks would eventually pull away in overtime with an 88-87 one-point victory, and it was a badly needed win for Minnesota State. and that's all because of play number 3, which happened the night before. Tied at 66, Winona State runs the clock down, and Kyle Bauman eventually hits the mid-range jumper with 1.5 seconds remaining for the upset over Minnesota State. The Warriors haven't had the greatest season in conference play, just 9-11 on the year, but Kyle can take a bow, man, as he comes through in the clutch at number 3. For number 2, we honored the 2 champions of the NSIC heptathlon and pentathlon competitions this past weekend. Concordia St. Paul's Colin Goligoski took home the heptathlon championship in Mankato with 5,151 points. It was a narrow 20-point victory over Minnesota State's Nathan Hancock. Goligoski's score ranks in the top 10 in all of Division II. Meanwhile, in the pentathlon, Augustana's Bree Wolber took home the championship with a school record 3,892 points. It was a mere 18 points shy of the all-time NSIC conference record, but it was the 3rd highest score in all of Division II and an automatic qualifier for the NCAA championship. But for number 1, we go to a different track where the obstacles were anything but for Minnesota State's Miles Hunter. The sophomore sets a new national record with a time of 7.64 seconds in the 60-meter hurdle finals at the South Dakota State Indoor Classic. Check it out again in slow motion, and Hunter still looks pretty darn quick. Hunter broke the record by 0.05 of a second, and not only did he out-hurdle everything in his lane and out-hurdle all of his competition, he hurdled his way to the top of my best plays of the past week. For more information on all things NSIC, you can visit northernsun.org. Once again, a thank you to all of our member schools for their contributions to this week's show, and we'll be back next week right here for another Northern Sun Experience.